Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for tuning in today. I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Operations, and I want to welcome one of our newest VIP members. They are Galvin Growth Group and owner Julie Galvin. Thanks for joining. All right, so we're actually starting off today's show with a couple of concerning developments. Brian, the first is that Senator Geis has proposed a new law called the Workplace Employee Boundaries Act. Can you please tell us what this is?
Yeah, this is a concern that we have with anytime there's a new labor law proposed, we always take them very seriously. This one received a hearing in the Senate Labor Committee, the State Senate Labor Committee, and essentially it would ban communications with employees outside of normal work hours. It's called the Workplace Employees Boundaries Act, but it really is broadly written. It could be enforced in a lot of different ways, but just the idea that a small company wouldn't be able to reach out to their team without a $500 fine during whatever is determined by somebody to be normal business hours would be quite or could be quite problematic. And so these are the sorts of things that we keep an eye on. They'll make sense. A lot of times what will happen is a legislator will come up with an idea and they will want this idea to it'll come from some specific circumstance. And so they'll take something maybe a constituent brought to them that was a problem or a perceived problem or something that's very specific to a situation. And then the the thing at their disposal is make a law. And so these laws get proposed. And when you're a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. So like that's the type of situation that we often find ourselves in, or trying to make the case for why this doesn't really work for especially for smaller companies when they don't have multiple shifts and people that they can't reach out to when things come up. And in small companies, there's always things coming up. Your problems don't always fit the calendar or the clock that you wish that they would fit. This is also from the same senator that we had been concerned previously about a paid family medical leave, a 12 to 16 week, depending on the iteration of the proposal, paid benefit for essentially like a family medical leave at the federal level, but to apply it more broadly at the state level for a lot more reasons, and to require employers to pay lots of in this case, 4 to 6 weeks or I'm sorry, 4 to 6 months of family medical leave, paid family medical leave. So really concerning that when these types of proposals are made, we take them all seriously. And so even though we know that this one is not poised to like run all the way through the process yet this year, once it gets on the table, it's on our radar screen, and we will keep you up to date, and you'll see from time to time we'll call on you to help us out with the legislators and making the case for why we do have to take a less is more approach when it comes to regulations, particularly those that get in between the employer-employee relationship.
And in other concerning news, there was a gubernatorial candidate who came out in favor of legalizing local minimum wages.
Yeah, and this, we've long SBAM has long since opposed having a patchwork of labor laws all over the state where you have an employee and they're working in this county and then they move over into another county, or they're working from home or whatever. There's a lot of reasons why not having like here are the in this case we're talking about minimum wage. You might think, oh well, everybody on my team makes more than minimum wage, so I don't really care about this. This is just one example or one iteration. They could have, when you lift the restrictions on like an individual city or individual county, individual township, or a village setting up their own labor laws, wages is just one part of it. So if you open the door there, there could be overtime rules that pass. There could be that are specific to a locality. There could be additional, well, like these things about restrictions on when you could contact an employee, or leave requirements, or sick time requirements, as we've seen that the state do, that to say, okay, locals could stack more on top of that. These are the things that really do make the environment less and less attractive. So in this case, it was, I don't think it was planned to make an announcement per se, but gubernatorial candidate Jocelyn Benson was asked during a um, a press event that was for the was to announce the endorsement of Mayor of Detroit, Mary Sheffield, of the Benson candidacy. Reporter asked about what about local minimum wages? Should those be allowed? And so I don't think that it was necessarily like, hey, we're going to unveil a proposal here as a response to a question. But this is one of the things that becomes quite important for not only organizations like SBAM to do, but all of our members that have relationships with public officials, and to talk to candidates throughout this whole process about why it makes sense to have a statewide standard as opposed to a patchwork where your employees that live in different jurisdictions or might have work that carries them across boundaries, that we really do need to have one standard across the whole system. Another one, for example, would be independent contractor rules. That again, that's not a proposal at the moment, but as soon as you open the door to having different labor laws in different jurisdictions within the state, all of these things are on the table, and we very much approach or prefer the single standard across the entire state.
All right, let's talk about some positive news now, Brian. This is related to association health plans and some legislation that's on the move. We have covered this before in the briefing, but can you remind us of the stakes here? And then while you're talking, I'm going to share a bit of a call to action for our viewers as well.
We are hopeful that a bill that made it out of the Senate Health Policy Committee last week will get a vote on the floor this week. So a vote of the full Senate, the state Senate, and move it over to the House of Representatives for consideration. So we have a call to action. We'd love it if you would participate in. So if you go in, you put in your name and address. Our system will find who represents you, and then aid with a very simple reach out to your senator, and saying that you support this legislation. It's important for small business. Basically, what it does is it allows small businesses to band together to self-insure. Right now, if you are a smaller company, you don't have enough employees enrolled in a health plan to be self-insured like a big employer, like say an auto manufacturer or a school district, or the government of the state of Michigan self-insures. These big companies, they can self-insure because their own employee base is big enough to where it's actuarially sound to create an insurance risk pool to pay claims into, or to pay premiums into, and to pay claims out of. And small companies don't have the ability to do the plan design and the negotiation of prices and all the things that the bigger players do. So what this would do is level the playing field. It would say small businesses could band together and create these insurance risk pools, build size, and then use that size in their own negotiations, network development, and plan design. So this is pretty big because for a lot of reasons that you could infer from what I was just saying, but also this legislation would let sole proprietors and those that have family businesses where all the employees are family members, it would let them in. And that's a part of the community, the business community right now, that can only buy insurance on the marketplace. And if you qualify for a subsidy, that's a good deal. If you don't qualify for a subsidy, which many business owners that have sole proprietor type businesses do not, then it's a very bad deal for them. They need to have another option. And so we're big believers in this. We've done it before. You used to be able to do this, or for a short window of time, you could do this before. and SBAM organized, and a lot of small businesses saved for that year when it was allowed, and then it got disallowed in federal law. And so what has opened up now is the availability for states to pass a law in order to allow this. So it's to allow small businesses across many industries to join together. That's the key here, and to allow sole proprietors into the insurance pool. Be a pretty big change. And we're hopeful that even though this is a political year and it's difficult to get big policy passed, that it will pass out of the Senate committee with no votes, and we're hoping that it'll similarly pass out of the Senate this week and over to the House, and then we'll start the work there as well. So if you would, please take a few moments to follow the link that shared, and to send a communication to your senator, that your state senator, that you support the passage of Senate Bill 1011, which would allow small businesses to operate on a level playing field with bigger companies when it comes to health insurance.
All right, let's move on. A new topic, and that is unemployment. And here in Michigan, it ticked up after 6 months and is now at 5%. So, what's happening in the Michigan labor market?
Yeah, this so it had been at 5% for 6 months, and it ticked up to 5.1, but there's a that's part of it. So overall you had the unemployment rate go up a little bit, but what makes it more concerning is that it was at the same time when we had additional shrinkage in the labor force participation rate. So if you've been following the briefing for a long time, you know all this whole year as the unemployment rate was staying at 5%. So month after month it was 5%, stayed 5%, but every month the number of jobs went down a little bit, but then the labor force participation went down, and so the percentage stayed at 5%. So it was staying at 5, but really underneath the hood there were other things that were happening that were concerning. Jobs shrinking, in the number of people in the workforce shrinking. So both of those things kept the percentage the same. And but the labor force participation actually went down by 0.4%. So 0.4%. It might not sound like a lot, but that is a lot for such a short period of time. So it's a concerning development. It puts the overall labor force participation now back under 60% again. And it felt like we just took forever for us to kind of scratch and claw our way out of the 50s in terms of labor force participation after the pandemic ended. And so we've fallen back in. That means that roughly 19,000 people fell out of the labor force for the month of May. So concerning these developments. There's no, and in some ways the it's dangerous when there's not huge drops that spur people into action. So what we have now is just long-term attrition of labor force participation and erosion of new job creation. So when it happens on such an incremental level, there's never some big thing that spurs policymakers into action, like during the great financial crisis in 2009, that the bottom falls out and we've got to act. In this case, it's kind of slipping away. The economic performance is slipping away, and it's concerning. But labor force participation in particular, though, I think is one of those things that it is a bigger threat to our future, because when there is opportunity, when there is economic growth, when there are things that are happening, there's not the labor force there, ready, waiting, looking, trying to get back into the labor force, take advantage of it. So even when you have these upswings, if your labor force participation is very low, just not in as good a position to jump on the opportunities when they arise.
All right, let's talk about H-1B visas. The Supreme Court did, just issue a ruling. Can you let us know what they decided?
These are the high skill labor visas where a company could, if they're like, for example, for engineering is the kind of classic example, where there might be a company that they can't find enough engineers, and so they'll recruit somebody from abroad, say like India, for example, and they get an H-1B visa, and so to they come under that visa. The Trump administration had, through administrative rule, proposed to increase the fee from that from an amount that was, I would say, relative. They weren't free, but they were relative. It was relatively nominal in the grand scheme of things of hiring an employee, to change the application all the way up, or to make the application fee $100,000. So to get one of these visas, it would be $100,000. The Supreme Court said that that was not legal, that that change isn't legal, even though it is customary for presidents to control fees and fee schedules on this. It needs to be it's tied to the cost of delivering the service. What they had determined was that this was essentially a policy change. This was a decision to say we don't want as many H-1B visas. Not that cost of processing the applications went up. It was a matter of, hey, we don't want as many of these. We think they're getting abused, and therefore we're going to create an environment where fewer people go that route, or fewer companies seek employees in that way. And that's a policy change. And so this is one of those areas where there's a constant push and pull between branches of government, and this is one where the executive branch pushed a policy beyond a certain point. There was a lawsuit brought, and within the courts, uh, the court, now this is a court of final jurisdiction, so the Supreme Court of the United States said a line was crossed there. This was a policy decision, not just an administrative action, therefore illegal. So at this point, that action it has been overturned. It doesn't just mean that it goes back to normal. Executives have other tools at their disposal. So maybe they'll come back with a lesser increase, or what have you. It's not really known quite yet what the next action will be, but another step in this back and forth balance of powers struggle. But this is one in particular that I wasn't surprised about, just given the fact that the language that was used in the change to increase the fee was specifically meant to reduce the number of people coming in, not meant to replace or cover the cost of processing these visas. And so, in other words, not administrative, more of a policy decision. Policy generally belongs in the hands of Congress.
All right, well, thanks for that update. Let's move on to Election Watch 2026, where some recent polls have kind of stirred some things up, and there's a little bit of controversy.
There really is, because the poll that had different races in it, but they were released on different dates. There was the gubernatorial on the Republican side, where you had the main contest, so a very competitive contest among Republicans, and then a very competitive contest among Democrats for the U.S. Senate nomination. Mitchell Research, and Steve Mitchell, a pollster for a long time in Michigan, published polls on both races, and it was surprised a lot of people. He basically had a three-way tie with the among the Republicans in the gubernatorial race, where you had John James at 28%, Mike Cox at 27, and Perry Johnson at 23, and then Eric Nesbitt at 4. So, but having those three within the margin of error of the poll was kind of surprising. There had been plenty of polls that were showing John James and Perry Johnson reasonably close to each other, and then Mike Cox in a solid third, but still distant, and then Eric Nesbitt in fourth place. This really did surprise people to see, wow, Mike Cox, former Attorney General, had really surged. Now he has been spending on TV, so it's not totally out of nowhere. He's put significant resources together, and so that was underway, but the idea of jumping that much was surprising to people. And then on the U.S. Senate side, we had Abdul El Sayed running against Haley Stevens, a member of Congress, and State Senator Mallory McMorrow showed Abdul surging all the way to 42%, Haley Stevens at 33, and Mallory McMorrow at 6. A lot of polls that had these three reasonably close to each other, and having McMorrow way behind was a surprise. Although, again, in both of these cases, even though the polling methodology was called into question pretty broadly, in fact, the Detroit News did an article on the methodology of the polling, which is very unusual. I've never seen an article like a mainstream article getting into the weeds of the methodology or the way that this polling was done. But there is a lot of energy behind El Sayed's campaign. So the idea that he would have moved up, not surprising, but moved into such a commanding lead, 42 to 33 to 6, surprising. And the same with Cox. Not surprising that he was moving up, but that he had moved up to basically a tie with John James, surprising. So it's the polls might be kind of directionally correct and not, but the top lines are just outliers, or maybe they are just true outliers. And so it's an interesting result, and definitely caused a lot of stir. A lot of folks stepped up to pay attention, like, wow, what's happening with these races? It had seemed like nothing had changed in a little while, and all of a sudden this was a big change. We will stay tuned though for when the next polls come out. There'll probably be multiple between now and the election day. These are some of the hottest watched elections in all of the country.
All right, Brian, it's time for our Data Monday report.
All right, we're going to talk about inflation. This is the reason that we didn't cover inflation in our first in our discussion, Sarah and I, is because I knew we were going to cover it on Data Monday. So you'll see the blue line kind of spiking up, not a surprise to anybody, 4.2% year over year. And then 2.9% for when you take out the commodities of food and energy. So both of those are up, and an anticipated spike came true on the headline inflation, the consumer price index, 4.2%. Let's see if I can get this to advance. Going on here. All right. The we have we also, if you look at month over month, a 0.5% increase just month over month. If you annualize that, there'd be 6%. And then 20% on the inflation measure that is less food and energy. So that is another, there's a bright spot in this. It's that the core inflation isn't moving as much. Now, looking at the categories, you'll see, not surprising, fuel-related items at the top when you look year over year, and then also when you look month over month. So the fuel is the thing that has moved the most. So 7% month over month, 60, or well, for gasoline, 40.5% year over year. So big jumps. Obviously, that's what people feel. Here's one I'm pretty concerned about, though, is that the producer price index is moving up faster. So this is the cost for producing, and so whether you look at the core producer price index, whether you take the commodities out or you look at the headline with all the commodities in, the cost of making things is up 6.5%. So the cost to producers is going up. That is a precursor oftentimes to consumer prices later on. Here's the one. If I were running for office, here's the one I would be most spooked about right now if you're in public policy, and that is looking at the real average wages, whether you're talking about average weekly earnings or you're talking about average hourly earnings. So hourly at the top, weekly at the bottom, they're both negative. And when it says real, what it means is you take the wages minus inflation. When it's negative, it means inflation is growing faster than wages. Nothing will put people in a worse mood than this when it comes to economic statistics. This is one. It's not like this thing that gets covered broadly, but if you look at consumer sentiment, you will find that it lines up very well with this metric. In other words, people get very, very frustrated when prices are growing faster than their income. And that's where we're back in now. Prices growing faster than income. So a concerning development. Why does this matter to people who own businesses? It's because this puts pressure on you, wage pressure on your own workforce because people are experiencing higher costs of living and therefore they're looking for higher wages. Consumer price index. This is just um, chart that Charlie Belio had shared on X. So I just grabbed it to share with you, just so you can see the difference between the target inflation growth, which is 2%. So that 2%, the red line is the actual, and you can see over time how those get broader and broader. Now, it hadn't been dramatic widening, but it continued to widen just a little bit more every single month until just recently in the widening got bigger. So this is going back to the month before the pandemic. Here, just looking at the cost of things that people regularly buy, and just the cumulative impact. It doesn't matter what happens with the monthly numbers as much to just regular people. They're feeling the cumulative impact over the last 5 years, and you'll see that it's substantial, and it probably exceeds the amount of wage increases that they had. And then what we have here next is just showing in this orange here on the bottom, you see is basically even or zero. And this is net worth of growth of households. And so this has definitely come down a substantial amount. And the final thing is the interest on the federal debt. And another kind of eye-popping chart so what is it shows 1,311, but that's in billions. So read that as $1.3 trillion. 1.3 trillion with a T is what the cost of servicing the US debt is right now. So when you think about all these inflationary pressures that are being faced right now, or that we're being faced with right now, the at the federal level, that much debt, it creates on interest rates a different kind of base expense that can filter its way into the rest of the system. And so a lot of moving pieces right now, but I would say on balance, there as we see small businesses that are kind of taking a wait and see, like being a little more conservative, pulling back on things and just getting ready for tough times. As you look at all the data, you can see exactly why. It's a natural response, I think, to all those things. Those are lines and charts and graphs and things, but those are representative of what people are really feeling and experiencing in the economy. And while not any single one of those things says, everything's falling apart right now, none of them are comfortable. And people are feeling a little less confident, little less comfortable. And it's not surprising when you look at the totality of the information right now.
All right, well, thanks for that report, Brian. Let's end on a positive note, though, and let's talk about 3 upcoming owner-to-owner events that SBAM has in July. I know summer is already flying by, so mark your calendars and get registered for July 9th. We're going to be in Lansing. July 23rd, we'll be in Bay City, and on July 26th, we'll be in Dearborn. So you can find details on all of these and other events on our website, sbam.org/events, but we would really love to meet you in person at one of these events. Have a great week, and we will be back here next Monday at 3 o'clock.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.